what's up? Welcome to the 92nd episode of a long-running series where the name of the game is to try to find developer techniques, or in some cases, left behind content. Obviously, the most amount of credit has to go to Codename Gamma for making this camera. Oh, that sounded fun to say. Seriously, this quality toolset was made within moments after the game's release, and I am just impressed. Make sure that you check the video description down below after this video so that you can do some boundary breaking of your own with his camera toolset. But listen, we got a lot to cover here, so I don't want to waste any more time. Let's go. This first thing I want to show you is a big deal, though it is in multiple areas of the game. Had I missed it in one spot, I could have found it in another. So the first area that I found it in was the opening cutscene for Crash Bandicoot 1. But there was camera limitations as well as a timer because once that cutscene's over, you start loading the first level. But thankfully, it's also in a couple of boss areas too. For example, Pinstripe, despite the fact that his fog is a deep, thick green, you can move Crash outside that boss room and it disables that fog. And now with full camera control, I can show you exactly what this is. And it's a wide variety of test elements used by the developers. There's of course several platforms in various shapes, but there's all sorts of really weird stuff too, like a transparent tree, spiky pillars with a checkered pattern, a super long pillar that is obviously meant to show just how much height you can get out of this area, an open door and a closed door, as well as a couple of objects that I can't explain. But my favorite object, of course, is this weird looking circle with a flag in the middle that reads the words "Sweet Spot" all over it. It's absolutely incredible that so much of this is stored inside the game itself, with no need to load a map. If you were playing that Pinstripe battle, all of this exists right behind your back. And funny enough, this won't be the last unused element that you get to see in this episode. By the way, let's talk about the first cutscene in Crash Bandicoot, because one of the most intriguing things to come out of this is the cages where all those animals are stored. Mostly you're gonna find unique models just for the eyes of those characters, making them essentially floating masks. However, there is one character that's holding the bars. And funny enough, the hands that are holding those bars with a sign under it saying Potoroo is in fact the series staple Potoroo character, Pinstripe. I guess it can be inferred because the eyes that the player's meant to see is in fact pinstripes if you were to match it up with the character model. But the arms grabbing those bars belongs to the full character model of Pinstripe, who is stretched out and hidden from the player. And his Tommy gun is here too because it's supposed to be attached to the character. But since they need to use the hands for the bars, they stored the Tommy gun way below the map. All of which is happening when you're watching the very first opening cutscene of Crash Bandicoot 1. And maybe the idea that that opening cutscene wasn't pre-rendered is a bit shocking to you. Well, it certainly was to me. Even the opening cutscene of Classic Crash, that's not pre-rendered. Which means that if it's not pre-rendered, we can totally check out what's going on here. So there's two things worth mentioning. One is that Classic Crash jumps inside the machine and becomes Modern Crash. And of course, we all want to know what happens to Classic Crash. Well, for the entirety of this scene until he comes out to play, Modern Crash is sitting there waiting inside the machine. And then once Classic Crash jumps into the machine, Classic Crash remains in the machine for the rest of the scene as well. Only to make sure that none of his geometry pokes through the machine, they broke his legs. But the other big surprise is that all this is taking place above the title screen. Although all the character models and everything else is removed from the scene after the title screen appears, you can still see the white environment used to make that scene. Now, I didn't want the focus of this episode to be a direct comparison to the Crash Bandicoot 1 episode that I did, because a lot of people that are watching this episode right now probably hadn't seen that Crash Bandicoot 1 episode. And there was a lot to explain as to why there wasn't anything to see in Crash Bandicoot 1 really. But to give you the short answer of it, it's really well optimized, so the player can get as much as they can out of one screen. However, the Crash Bandicoot remake has a more modern route. Sorta. Whereas all the geometry that was in the original game would simply not exist outside the boundaries. The remake has a lot more to see. However, the amount of detail that is shown is tied to the amount of distance you are from it, which makes a really funny effect. If you were to take the camera far out into the distance, you could remove all the objects that make up the map, but you can still see the ground of the map itself, allowing you in a lot of cases to see the entire trail from beginning to end. Also, if you were one of the very unlucky few who saw it before I cut it out of the video, I did a very cringy intro for the Crash Bandicoot 1 episode. And in it, I showed something that is not in the episode anymore, which is how the spear traps look when you take the camera out of bounds. You see, in the original game, it just disappeared outright, aiding the point that it's really hard to find anything outside of the boundaries of this game. However, in the Crash Bandicoot remake, it's something you'd much rather see, which is the spear trap mushing all of its polygons together to make a very stout looking spear trap inside the pillar. And the last comparison that we'll make is with the snake. In the original episode, I showed you there was no tail underneath his body, as well as gave you a better look of his design on the back. And surprisingly, in the remake, he does have a full body. However, when it's inside the hole, most of it's compressed to give it a really stubby look. And when the snake goes into the hole, it's programmed to go smaller and smaller. And the way this works is that the value gets lower and lower to shrink it down more and more. And if you were to set a character size value to 0, it makes the character model disappear outright. However, in the case of the snake, you can see the smallest value for the size before 0 hangs in the air for a bit before going to 0. I wasn't expecting this for the Tribesman. Now, normally when you watch 92 episodes of Boundary Break, you'll find that if you take the camera inside of a character model, there's usually nothing really there to see. However, with the Tribesman, whose defining feature is to have hair all over their face, you can take the camera inside of that bowl of hair and find a fully rendered head, complete with shading textures for where the eye sockets should be. And now we got ourselves a viewer request. And the request was to see if Dr. Cortex is hiding somewhere in the map before the animation is triggered where he kidnaps Tawna. And the results were kind of interesting. So at face value, I couldn't find the model for Dr. Cortex hiding anywhere in this map. He very well could be somewhere, but after 20 minutes of trying to look for him, I couldn't find him. However, what's really cool about Crash Bandicoot is that everything that you see before you move on to the next level is stored somewhere in the map, which means that this bonus area that you're in is stored somewhere in relation to where the main stage is. And we could take the camera from the level and move it over into the bonus stage before Crash gets there. And when we do that, we can find not only Tawna in an A pose, but Dr. Cortex in a T pose, meaning he has to be stored somewhere when the bonus area is activated. The same effect with the T pose can happen to Nitrous Brio too. And like I mentioned before, various other areas will be hanging in the air as well, like the results screen, as well as the game over screen, which as you'll see in a minute is stored way above the original map. In fact, it's right at the starting area of the original map. Now, since you don't get a chance to see this all in one shot, let's do a zoom out of the Cortex power sign as well as the rest of the stage, so that you can get a nice look at what indoor buildings look like from out of bounds. Okay, let's start talking about some of the bosses. For Papu Papu, there's something really interesting hanging in the sky. It's a large blocky object with developer textures on it. Now, unfortunately, without an official statement from Vicarious Visions, explaining what this is only speculation, but according to anonymous developer sources, they say it's very likely that it's tied to lighting. And some folks want to know what happens to Crash Bandicoot when he bounces off of Papu Papu and leaves the stage. Well, unfortunately, there isn't too much to see. The second that he's off screen, he disappears. Though, if you have an Aku Aku mask, he still remains in the stage. So, you know exactly where Crash is, it's just you're not allowed to see him. Next up is Ripperoo, and I just wanted to see his stage at different angles. But also I wanted to show you what happens after Ripperoo falls off the waterfall. Panning the camera down will show you that Ripperoo stays in the same frame of animation that you last saw him, but hangs in place at this specific coordinate. And as for Pinstripe, we already got a good look at his area from another angle. But one of the things I wanted to revisit with Pinstripe is that the game has a weird little Easter egg, and that's in the original Crash Bandicoot, there's a little crude drawing that says Pin on it, and it was kind of hard to make out what was going on here. But I made a point to show you guys up close anyway, since it would have been so hard to see in the original game. Now going back to the Insane Trilogy, we can see very clearly that at least in this interpretation, Pinstripe is in doodle form attacking Crash Bandicoot. And with Dr. Nitrous Brio, there was a lot more to talk about in the original Crash Bandicoot, but with this one, not so much. Though I can just mention that for whatever reason, there is a stray candle flame underneath the map. Alright, so now I'm going to take a minute to show you a couple things that I know a lot of you in the comments would ask about if I didn't show you, despite the fact that I don't really find it all that interesting. Which means we'll shoot through these really quick. First off, when Crash goes from one island to another, you notice that he starts on one island, the camera pans over, and all of a sudden he's on the other one. What happens to him? The truth is while the camera is panning, Crash disappears from one island and just suddenly appears on the other. There's a couple of enemies that come from underneath the ground. Some people are asking what it looks like when they haven't come out of there yet. And in this one shot, I'm showing you two at the same time. One is for the plant, and the other is for the skunks. and unfortunately it works a lot of the same way as the snake does, where it shrinks and disappears, or suddenly appears from a very small size. And when Crash falls down a pit and his shoes fly up, what does that look like from another angle? Well, Crash just keeps shrinking smaller and smaller as he falls down, and his shoes just suddenly appear out of nowhere. And people want to know if Tawna was waiting on the other side of the curtain before the load screen, and unfortunately no, she's not. The next thing I want to touch on are stage oddities. Now, like I said at the start of this episode, Crash Bandicoot 1 was all about having pretty much nothing outside of the boundaries. Whereas with the remake, there's a little bit of a surplus, things that you would never be able to see, and stuff that was never used. For example, on this one stage, there's a whole row of plants that are well outside of the stage boundaries and doesn't serve any purpose at all. As well as in another stage, there's these platforms right at the start that don't seem to ever get used. In fact, placing things at the start of the level seems to be a running theme, because over in this stage, you can also find some flowers that were never used at any other part of this stage. And a lot of stages have this developer textured cylinder, which again, hopefully I can get in contact with someone from Vicarious Visions so I can figure out what exactly this does. Couldn't pass up the chance again to use that technique that we used on the developer room, where we get Crash out of the boundaries so that we can change the lighting in fog. And naturally we had to do this at the temple ruins, where it's especially dark so that you can see with the lights on, because it almost looks like a completely different stage at that point. And for some reason the textures on the outside of this level are completely different from any other stage in the game. They don't match the inside walls, instead they have their own unique look. And you might notice that I haven't talked about Crash Bandicoot 2 or 3 yet, and that's because there's 3 full-length games in one package. So I'm gonna have to divide this up into parts, but I did have a little bit of extra time left over after beating Crash Bandicoot 1, so I can show you a couple things in Crash Bandicoot 2. The first of which is the stage that you start the game with has all of the set pieces from the opening cutscene. This includes the cave that Dr. Cortex falls into, the base that he was in when he was monologuing about using Crash, as well as the planet and island, and then some. There's one more thing here that wasn't in the opening cutscene, and it's a large untextured device. It's wicked strange. And there's 2 things to talk about Coco. The first is the laptop screen, which is different from what it was on the PlayStation 4. It was the Crash Bandicoot Reddit page, but this time around it's a screenshot of the development software that Vicarious Visions used, which is called the Academy Software Development Kit. And underneath Coco is half of her laptop, only really tiny and black. Hey, so first off, what you're going to see on the screen here right now is Stormy Ascent. It's a unused level from Crash Bandicoot 1 that was later remade and actually put into the remake of N. Sane Trilogy. So it's pretty cool. That was suggested by folks on Twitter. That's like a new thing that I'm doing now, is letting you guys just decide what we're going to put in the outro. Anyways, big news. Those of you who know Vinesauce Vinny, which how do you not know the man by this point? I'm going to be on his channel streaming Boundary Break stuff. So it's going to be really cool. That's going to be next week. He promised me. So if you don't see me there, you can totally blame him. It's not my fault. No, I'm sure I'm going to be there. Anyways, yeah, that's going to be really exciting. Keep an eye out for me. And outside of that, oh, you know what? I almost forgot. You can recommend whatever you want for Crash Bandicoot 2 and 3 when I finally come back to the episode and do those parts. So this is like a rare opportunity. Usually I have to do this on Twitter, because I don't know what games I'm going to be covering ahead of time to let you know on the YouTube channel. But this time around, I'm definitely going to be doing those 2 games eventually. So, you know, just tell me what you want. I read all the comments, good and bad, and I'll check them out. And I'll make sure to include as many things as I can. But anyways, guys, I'm out of here. I'm going to enjoy my summer, really. So I'm probably going to work a little bit late. Probably be a little bit late with the next episode, but you know, I'm sure you guys will be fine with that. It won't be too late anyway. But guys, I'll see you next week, and take care.